Good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Village Board of Skokie for Monday, July the 1st, 2024. This evening, we will be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Village Clerk Manal Desai.
Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The meeting will come to order, and the clerk will please call the roll.
Trustee Sutker? Here. Trustee Robinson?
Here.
Trustee Kuhn?
Here.
Trustee Johnson?
Here.
Trustee Pierce-Lovan?
Here.
Trustee Klein?
Here.
Mayor Van Dusen?
Here, we have a quorum. Next item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda for this evening's meeting. A motion is in order. Trustee Klein, seconded by Trustee Johnson. Is there anything that anybody wishes to have removed? If not, call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker? Aye. Trustee Robinson?
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn?
Aye.
Trustee Johnson?
Aye.
Trustee Pierce-Lovan?
Aye.
Trustee Klein?
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen?
Aye, the motion passes. This evening, we are celebrating with a proclamation the 90th anniversary, as of July 11, 2024, of the Decalogue Society of Lawyers. And Trustee Pierce-Lovan will do the honors.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Whereas the Decalogue Society of Lawyers will celebrate its 90th anniversary on July 11, 2024, and whereas the Decalogue Society of Lawyers was founded in 1934 to fight anti-Semitism and all forms of discrimination and intolerance, and whereas the Decalogue Society of Lawyers is the oldest bar association in the United States, and whereas the Decalogue Society of Lawyers promotes public education and legal action, protect the rights and privileges of all people, and whereas the Decalogue Society of Lawyers has remained ever vigilant against public and private practices which perpetuate racial and religious hatred or are insensitive of the needs of the Jewish people, and whereas the Decalogue Society of Lawyers members participate in social action, render useful community service, and cooperate in movements for the public welfare, and whereas the Decalogue Society of Lawyers provides free continuing legal education to assist its members in becoming better informed and skilled lawyers, and whereas the Decalogue Society of Lawyers supports student chapters at Illinois law schools to encourage law students and young lawyers to incorporate the ideals of religious freedom, racial tolerance, and public service into their future careers. And whereas for 90 years, the Decalogue Society of Lawyers members have worked diligently to bring increased dignity and honor to the legal profession. Now, therefore, our mayor of Village of Skokie, George Van Dusen, hereby expresses congratulations to the Decalogue Society of Lawyers on its 90th anniversary on July 11, 2024, and further congratulate outgoing President Judge Megan Goldage, incoming President Attorney Joel B. Bruckman, and to all members of its Executive Committee and Board of Managers. Congratulations.
And this evening, we have Mr. Bruckman with us, and we'd like to give him the proclamation.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate this. Of course. Thank you so much.
Now, you went there, were you one of the founding members?
Yeah. Well,
He's aged well.
I have the best moisturizer.
We'll put that in.
To take it into the 90th year. I absolutely will. You know, it will be the first thing she notices. Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you again. Thank you.
Tell Megan congratulations.
I will.
The next item on the agenda is report of our village manager, John Lockerbie.
Thank you, Mayor Van Duzen and village trustees. Good evening, everyone. Item A is regarding the appropriations and water rate ordinances for the fiscal year 2025. The proposed appropriation ordinance for all village funds and the Skokie Public Library that establishes spending authority and is a follow-up to the village board's approval of the budget last month. Estimated revenues and planned utilization of fund balance are sufficient to cover the planned expenditures for the fiscal year. The proposed water rate ordinance includes a 46 per 100 cubic feet increase in the water rate. This is a $4.64 increase in the minimum bill over the prior year. The increase is necessary to fund water, sewer, and flood control expenditures during the coming year. Even with the rate increase, Skokie's water rate remains the second lowest among area municipalities. I concur with staff's recommendation and respectfully request Mayor and Board review of the draft ordinances. The final ordinance will be brought before the board at the next board meeting on July 15th for consideration and for a second reading and adoption at that time. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any comments or questions? Trustee Coe?
Can you explain or clarify for me the difference in the district distinctions?
Julian Prindy, our finance director, is the chief drafter of this, and so he's approaching the podium.
Good evening. Yes, trustee, are you referring to the distinction in the billing periods for the districts?
Yeah, I read it as the phased-in approach for, through October 2024, but in the description I had District 1 to 3, and I didn't know what that was.
So the entirety of the customers for water are split into 3 districts, and we bill those 3 districts quarterly, 4 times a year. Those reads come through for every 3 months on, every month a portion of a third essentially of each district, but because of the timing for when we get the reads for the usage, we stagger the billing and we stagger the increase.
Got it. Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Okay.
And that'll be back at the next meeting. And then item B was approved as part of tonight's consent agenda, and that completes my report this evening.
Thank you. Before we move on to the Corporation Council, I want to take a moment to introduce Melissa Villegas, who is the new chair of the Public Safety Commission. And I want to thank her for all of the work that she has done. Melissa, if you would be recognized. Paul Batalis, with your consent, will become emeritus on the commission. I think as many of you know, Paul served several decades as chairman of the commission, going back to the days before it was the Public Safety Commission and it was the Bicycle Safety Commission. And Paul, we want to thank for his many years of dedication to the village and for his leadership, along with Melissa, by the way, who during COVID led us through the one and the only public safety report that was done during COVID. It was a Herculean effort, and Melissa, thank you for everything that you did. I thank Paul when I talked to him the other day. And with that, next report is our Corporation Counsel, Michael Lorge.
Thank you, Mayor, trustees. Good evening, everyone. Items A, B, C, D, and E are ordinances which were on the consent agenda tonight at the beginning of the meeting and were adopted at that time. Item F is a resolution which is on the agenda for board action tonight. This resolution, consistent with village procedure, Illinois Municipal League recommendations, and the state statutes, addresses the approval, release, and confidentiality of various executive session minutes. Additionally, it will retain the confidentiality of the outstanding list of verbatim recordings that are approved as confidential. No verbatim recordings are to be destroyed under this resolution. Mayor, I'd request board action tonight.
Motion would be in order. Trustee Johnson, seconded by Trustee Robinson. Any comments or questions? Trustee Johnson.
I just want to ask, so OMA kind of presumes, it doesn't require this, but it presumes that we would enter a closed session to do these reviews ourselves, even though that's something we haven't done so far this term. I had asked about this at our last meeting, and the suggestion was that we would do a closed session review of these. So we're just going to proceed directly with the resolution?
As to the clarification, the statute does not require it in any way, shape, or form, and various municipalities do it in different ways. And the idea of keeping it in open session, we think, is consistent with some of the discussions that have been raised by various trustees at this point. So unless the mayor were to feel differently, we've set it up to proceed this way, and it was pretty clear, I think, from the procedures that we brought to the board at the last meeting, that would be an approach. Certainly, anyone can ask for executive session on it, and it would be a matter of a vote of this board whether they wanted to do that.
I will say, I do appreciate that we're kind of getting back into compliance with this section of OMA, section 206D, which is about our semi-annual reviews. I do want to say, at this meeting and our last meeting, it's been a little frustrating to hear us talk about this as if we are continuing a consistent village process. I do want to kind of remind the board that we were out of compliance with this section of OMA for roughly 6.5 years. So I'm really glad that we are resuming compliance, even if it's in a really minimal way. And I think, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that we're fixing a problem, not necessarily continuing an old pattern.
A motion is in order. Trustee Sucker, seconded by Trustee Kuhn. Are there any other comments or questions? If not, call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker?
Aye.
Trustee Robinson?
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn?
Aye.
Trustee Johnson?
Aye.
Trustee Pierce-Lovan? Trustee Klein? Mayor Van Dusen?
Aye, the motion passes.
Thank you. That would conclude my report for this evening.
Next item is 3 items under unfinished business. 2 are reports. One is on ranked choice voting, and the other is on term limits. The first is ranked choice voting, and Scott Euler is with us this evening from Kleinthorpe Jenkins. Scott is the author of the report on ranked choice, and perhaps you could summarize your findings for us.
I will do my best. Good evening, Mayor and members of the Village Board. We were asked to prepare for this evening for your consideration a public question, referendum question, that would allow the voters of Skokie to consider the adoption of ranked choice voting. If you have had a chance to review the resolution we prepared and the question, it is a lengthy question. In Illinois, there are referenda that tend to be lengthier, in this case because, in part, you passed a previous referendum that has adopted a new system of electing your governmental officials by district, with several other members of the board being elected at large. We have to structure this question to address each of the offices. So the beginning, as we lay out this question, we have to address the district officers. That is a more straightforward question relative to ranked choice voting. I don't mean to assume you do or do not know a great deal about ranked choice voting. Does anybody have any initial questions about that system itself? Yes.
I would just say assume that no one
Okay.
knows.
So briefly,
Yeah, just kind of give refresher or just a very elementary way to understand,
okay.
or complex, however you want to
So
present it.
part of this is philosophical. whether or not you believe in an alternative way to elect officials in Illinois. This is a relatively unique system being considered by some municipalities in Illinois at this point. It is not expressly addressed or set forth in the Illinois Election Code. The general process for electing officials in Illinois, whether that's a school district, a municipality, park district, is majority vote will elect that candidate, whatever it is. It's a relatively straightforward voting system. And that is the way that our county, Cook County, all the counties across Illinois, currently structure our election system. This system is a little bit unique. It provides that voters can rank their candidates on the ballot by preference. So if you have, for example, 5 candidates running for your seat, the voter would have the opportunity on their ballot to rank their candidate by order of preference. So they could vote for their first preference, first preferred candidate, second, third, fourth, fifth. The system then provides if no candidate receives a majority of the first choice votes in the first round of counting, we drop to the last candidate with the least number of votes, and that candidate's votes are redistributed to their second choice. And that process continues until a candidate receives a majority of votes. Is that relatively clear?
Relatively.
Okay, there are some states that use this process. Illinois does not currently use this process in general. And the proposition is being considered tonight by you, the Skokie Village Board, as a public question that the voters can vote on here in the Village of Skokie in the near future.
You said there are some states. Can you just, if you know them offhand?
I know Alaska is the one that is typically pointed to.
Right.
There are several states out east that have adopted ranked choice voting. And that system, for some, philosophically, is a system that is preferred to a simple majority vote system. Both systems are in place in various states, various municipalities. So,
This replaces the one vote, one person?
no. That's a good question. There are, if you've had the chance to examine ranked choice voting, the general pros and cons that exist with this system, the vote that any voter casts in a ranked choice voting system is still only counted once for a candidate. As you work your way through this formula that I described, that I hope is clear enough, each voter's vote is only counted once for a winning candidate. There is a voting process where you move the votes from candidate to candidate if there isn't a candidate that receives a majority vote on the first ballot. But each voter is still a one person, one vote system at the end of the day.
So to simplify, excuse me, is these votes move up, so if you cast your vote for the person who comes in your scenario in 5th place, it goes to the person who came in 4th place? You said it goes up?
No,
Okay.
not exactly. So the last place, if no candidate on the first round of voting, first round of counting, receives a majority of the votes, based on the threshold that you establish. I can talk in a moment about at-large candidates. The threshold is a bit different in that circumstance. But if no candidate receives the fixed threshold that they have to pass to be a successful candidate, you take the candidate that received the least number of votes and you reallocate their votes to their second choice. So it's the next most preferred candidate on the ballot of the candidate who received the least number of votes.
So it's one person, one vote, but if my guy loses, it's gonna go somewhere else?
No,
Yes?
no, I don't think that's the way it works. as those votes are recast, there still is only a single candidate that succeeds, that wins. So as those votes are reallocated, you still have one vote that is attributed to the ultimate winner in that circumstance.
Even though your guy is a loser.
Correct. Correct.
That's as clear as mud to me, sir.
And I'm not here to tell you should or should not adopt a ranked choice voting system. It is obviously more complicated than our current system in many respects.
Think of it that, think of it that the individual who voted for someone who ends up in last place, then their second choice becomes a critical factor in choosing the successful candidate.
In my world, I just don't see it.
I understand the concern that it is different than our traditional system.
Thank you.
Trustee
More difficult
Sullivan.
to track.
Thank you. I do understand how you described it. Thank you. I'm curious what's in place for if the voters choose it goes on the ballot and the voters choose this as the way of voting. How do we implement it? Isn't it a completely different system that we've been using? What's the cost factor to it? Where do the ballots come from, since it's a different system than we're using in Illinois? I mean, I think there's other ramifications to making this choice that we should be discussing, and finance is always something I'm worried about.
Right, so those are relevant concerns. They are county concerns at the end of the day. The county is our election system, and they run your elections as required. In this case, they are not currently structured to set up an election system for ranked choice voting. I would imagine many of you have read the articles regarding Evanston and their interactions with the county at this point. They have asked the county to implement their ranked choice voting referendum, which passed 2 years ago. The county is indicating to Evanston that they are not currently in a position to implement that system, given the voting systems and equipment that they have in place. So there is an Illinois ranked choice task force that was impaneled by law back in 2023. They have worked over the past 2 years, and they completed their work today. They were supposed to have completed their work today. Their report on ranked choice voting and the kinds of issues that you're addressing that are potentially complicated to implement, including financially, were to be taken up by this task force. I contacted Senator Murphy's office, who is one of the chairs of that task force, today. I've contacted that office several times, asking about the report. It's expected to be issued in the next 2 months. So they have completed their work, they're generating their final report, and we expect to receive those recommendations of the task force about how potentially the implementation of a ranked choice voting system would work in Illinois. And I'll suggest this: even though you are a municipality that has greater flexibility as a home rule unit to propose and adopt certain kinds of referenda, there are lots of other governmental entities that vote in Illinois. School districts, park districts, fire districts, they do not have that flexibility. So you would have currently 2 different systems in the voting place to manage ranked choice voting and to manage our traditional voting system. So I think the task force is looking at that particular consideration, and we'll try to address that consideration with recommendations.
Thank you.
Yeah, and one of the things you'll notice is that we would not begin the ranked choice voting until the consolidated election of April of '29, which would be the first time that mayor, clerk, and 2 of the at-large trustees would be up. But in light of the difficulty that Evanston is having and the county in implementing it for the city of Evanston, it was our thinking that this gives we'll give some time for the task force report to come out and for other municipalities to decide if they similarly want to engage in a ranked choice voting system. So it's a 5-year period. 5-year period. Next April, we have our elections, and then we begin scattered elections. Those elected by district are elected for 2 years. So 2 years after that, 27, we would have the districts up again. And then in 29, with scattered elections, we would have the at-large mayor, clerk, 2 trustees.
Thank you. Can I ask a question based on what you before? I'm sorry. I think you said that it's different for the districts versus the at-large. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Can you explain that, please?
51% is a successful candidate in the district voting, single candidate for each of the 4 districts. For at-large candidates, since they will run together, those 2 at-large trustees, the threshold to calculate all of the votes cast results in a 33% threshold. So 33% for one at-large candidate, 33% for the other at-large candidate, and 33% that may have gone to neither of those candidates potentially. If you add that up to 100%, the threshold that you target for an at-large candidate is different than a simple majority, than 50%. That 33% is necessary because you have more than one candidate running at the same time for the same office.
Is it, may I continue? I'm
Sure.
sorry. Is it possible that you could have, let's say at the at-large, there's numerous candidates running. Is it possible that 3 people, I guess it is, could be 33%? Then what happens?
Then you use, sorry to go back through this, then we use the same formula of the least successful candidate, the candidate that received the least number of votes, will drop out of the race, and that candidate's second choice votes, I'm sorry, that candidate's second preferred choice receives their votes. And then if you have any of the 2 candidates, either of the 2 candidates that exceed 33%, they are elected.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. No further questions. Thank you.
No? No. I mean, this isn't up for a vote tonight. It
No,
will
no,
be.
no, completely, but it's
Yeah.
good to understand.
Oh, no,
Thank you.
this is
Yeah.
what I was
Thank you.
hoping people would have questions. Trustee Sucker and then trustee Kuhn.
I do want to make sure that people will understand what this says and what they're voting for. So is there some kind of like objective pamphlet that people have on ranked choice voting? I mean, I think it's, as you can see tonight, like I think there's gonna be a lot of questions around it. Is there some kind of,
There are 2 popular websites, I think national websites. One is Fair Vote. I can't remember the email address, but it's called Fair Vote. And yes, they have resources that describe the process, describe the pros and cons that are associated with the process, and describe the voting system and formula that is typically embedded in the question. I can't say it's simple. It isn't simple, especially with at-large candidates. It becomes a little bit more complicated.
okay, and there,
What we can do is send out the email address to everybody on the board.
I just want to make sure it's like a non-biased, website where it,
Is it objective?
yeah.
The website you mentioned, is it an objective one?
It is philosophically oriented toward ranked choice voting.
Okay.
There are additional websites, I think, that probably take a more neutral position on the pros and cons of ranked choice voting. And the system has been voted down in some places where they do not prefer to move to a different system.
I just want to make sure that people objectively get the information that they need to make a choice for themselves.
Yes,
No.
if you read this question, as I wrote this question, I went back through it a number of times to make sure that it was as understandable as possible. It's not a simple referendum question to understand. So it would require some study ahead of time, I think, if you really were to fully understand the question.
And what we could do is send out some addresses for everybody, so you can go consult them if you wish.
Can I add one note, Mayor, to your timing?
Sure.
Statement? The task force that I mentioned, the Illinois Task Force, in its enabling legislation, has a timeline that is established for the work of the committee. So the committee's report is due today. We will not have it today. We'll have it in the next couple months. When that report is issued, the time frame set forth in the statute itself targets the primary in, the general primary in 2028. So for the Village of Skokie, if you were going to track the timeline consistent with the task force work, you would be looking at your election, your consolidated election in 2029.
Trustee Coe?
Just following up on that statement, and recognizing that we can't see the future, with the initial implementation set for the 2028 presidential primary election, assuming that all goes well, the language is drafted for ranked choice voting to begin April 2029 of the consolidated election. Would you recommend including some additional language to make sure that the trigger is the initial implementation of the primary election?
To that, in fact, the task force recommendations
In
are
terms of the
implemented on that
implemented-
timeline?
Yeah. It's, again, you can't foresee the future, but in the event that for whatever reason it stalls, it doesn't get implemented, or something happens, that we're not forced to implement something based on a timeline that was initially tied to this initial implementation.
That's a good question. That would be, I'd have to give that a little bit of thought about how to do that in the question itself. How that would be dependent on the actual timing of the implementation of legislation from the General Assembly, if that's what we get.
Yep.
I'd have to give that a little bit more thought, but
Okay.
that's a good question.
Thank you. And then as a follow-up question, would you recommend having the board also have an ordinance that would clarify what the implementation would look like prior to having it be on the referendum?
There, you could begin to try to address some of the issues that could come up with ranked choice voting, tie votes. There are some things that could arise under this system that are not addressed in the referendum question. My concern, and I'm not exactly sure how to perfectly address this, you see how long the question is right now. One of the concerns that arises with any referendum question is whether or not it is clear enough to the voters and their choice is understandable. If the question becomes too complicated, I think the referendum itself becomes problematic. So how many of those details we build in, it's not clear. You can adopt an ordinance. There are some cases in Illinois that suggest that you can refer to your own regulations or statutory provisions that are not in the question itself to assist the question, the implementation of the question. So that's possible for some of the other issues. Most of the issues that will be involved with the implementation of this kind of a question are county questions. And we do not have those answers at this point.
Got it. So for the question regarding a tie, for instance, if it's not something that we would necessarily have clarification on at this time when voters go to their booths, and they would have to make the decision based on the exact verbiage that's included in the referendum, but not outside that context, because those are things that still need to be clarified,
Yes.
potentially?
Yes, potentially. It's not clear that the current election code, which is a different voting system than ranked choice voting, there are provisions for tie votes in our election code. It's not clear that those provisions that relate to our current system would be applicable to this system.
And that's something that the county would have to clarify, or the state?
the General Assembly could assist, if the General Assembly moves in the direction of this system of voting, we anticipate they'll amend the election code and they will create the necessary procedures and mechanisms that we now have for our regular voting system, the system we rely on right now, for ranked choice voting.
Got it.
The officials that sit on this task force are from the Illinois State Board of Elections. They're election officials, election experts. So they do have a good deal of expertise to bring to bear to this particular system and how it would be implemented.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just one? It sounds like it might be a computer programming type issue that's completely different from what we have now. Is that right for the county?
The equipment that will be necessary for this system will be different. Yes.
Because if they have to go to the next preferred candidate, they have to have some kind of logic in there to get that to happen.
We currently have a system in Illinois that requires a backup paper ballot. That is not necessarily something that is going to work with this particular system, since the voting is more complicated.
Right. I mean,
Multiple rounds of voting.
I'm seeing it as pretty complicated for the county, so, and obviously, like you said, what happened with Evanston shows that they're still working on, they still have a lot of work to do.
They do.
Yeah, okay,
And
thank you.
it's not just Cook County. This is statewide, and there are counties that have fewer resources than Cook County does
Okay.
to adjust or adapt their current election equipment.
Thank you.
Trust,
Thank you again. Had a chance, as we're sitting here, to glance at the article regarding the Evanston Ranked Choice Voting Ordinance. And as I'm reading it right now, it says that the Deputy Clerk of Communications for the Cook County Clerk's Office informed Evanston that there is no voting system that exists and is certified by the Illinois State Board of Elections that would allow for it at this point. So now I'm really confused. How are we looking at something that's not even recognized by the Illinois State Board of Elections?
And I believe that is why the Illinois Task Force was created.
But
to-
the
to-
Senator Murphy's task force,
Correct.
okay.
To try to ensure that there is a uniform approach statewide to the manner in which elections are run, including this kind of a system.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Johnson.
I asked you about this before the meeting. I just wanted to clarify, well, first of all, thank you for your explanation of the at-large versus district positions. I asked you earlier about the difference between the threshold being 1/3, the fraction, and being the percentage, 33%. Am I correct that the threshold is 1/2 and 1/3?
It is, the
Okay.
33% is intended to be a third. It's intended to break the vote into 3 equal portions. So if you did ask me this before we started the meeting, if 1/3 would be more precise, it probably would, if we wanted to use the fraction 1/3 as opposed to 33%.
I wanted to.
But either one works. Whatever you adopt is the formula you use. So if it's 33%, that works. If you want to use a third, that works as well.
I would like to suggest to the board that we amend this just to substitute 1/3 for 33%. I know it seems like the same thing, but there's a difference between the fraction 1/3 and the percentage 33%. And this is a minor detail, but I think it's an important one.
I mean, we would take that up at the next meeting.
Okay.
When we vote on it, but everybody should be aware.
Okay. You were talking about how ranked choice voting is not outlined in the state election code, but it is your opinion that we have the home rule authority to implement this, correct? Or to adopt this? Maybe not implement,
I have to
but to
say,
adopt.
I have not been asked that question, and I cannot answer it as I stand here. It's a complicated question.
Okay.
There is a lot of law going back 50 years in Illinois about how the election code applies to home rule municipalities. And it's a complicated question, I would say.
Since Evanston has already adopted this, it seems like the presumption is that the Cook County Clerk's Office might not have this implemented by April. I mean, is the presumption that they may have this ready by April 2027?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, I've spoken to officials in the county clerk's office about this issue, and I'm not sure there is a current clear plan
Okay.
for how to move forward.
I will say, I know, I understand the logic of kind of waiting till 2029. I don't necessarily disagree with it. I do somewhat disagree with it. I do think it would be better for us to go with 2027. There is a good chance that the Cook County Clerk's Office figures this out in response to Evanston. And, you know, if we put 2027 and for some reason the county clerk's office wasn't ready, then we could be, you know, in Evanston's position, just waiting. We could be there, ready.
Trustee, some of the literature, some of the discussion is to be wary and concerned about voter confusion.
Right.
And one of there's so much that goes into educating the community towards this that we'd have to gear up well before that election. And then should it, which is quite likely not to be ready to roll out, then we will have turned the community inside out in terms of understanding their voting. So it's just a consideration
That's fair.
is to achieve something, if this is something that the board wants to achieve, in a way that's set up for success for our constituents and residents.
Understood. I do, if I can just make one more, it seems like there's a lot of, you know, questions about this being complicated, this being confusing. At least from all the research I've done from Fair Vote and other resources about ranked choice voting, there have been a lot of studies done of places around the country that have implemented ranked choice voting. And at least from my understanding, a lot of these studies show that voters do find this confusing until they do it. And then once in practice they do it, they realize that the process is very simple. You're just ranking. And studies have shown that voters who have tried this and experimented with this found it easy to use once they got there and liked doing it and wanted to keep doing it.
To clarify, my comment was not in regard to that.
No, I was.
My comment is that if you tell people and train people and orient them for a 27 ranked choice, and the county or the state's not ready,
Sure.
and we have to shift back to traditional voting, there would be some confusion. That's all.
Oh, I'm sorry. Trustee Sucker, then trustee Coon.
For the sake of discussion, trustee Johnson, I really think that we should wait for the 2029. I mean, I'm seeing I'm realizing how complicated this is for Cook County and their clerk's office, and I would want to make sure that we didn't rush it for no reason.
That's fine. Honestly, my biggest concern is less the date and is more that minute language about 1/3 versus 33%, and just making sure we've got the calculations correct in the actual question. That's kind of my bigger concern.
Trustee Coon.
Oh, I'm sorry, trustee Coon. Excuse me.
My concern is that there are potentially unintended consequences, and part of that research has also indicated that voters who actually take advantage of the ranking opportunities tend to be white voters and affluent voters with more education. So I want to be mindful of how, when we think about disparities in democracy and participation, that we're not letting people out of the process because we're creating a process that's even more confusing. And for that reason, I think that we should tie that the date to the initial implementation on the state level for ranked choice voting, so that there is a system in place that is proven, and people have already gone through the initial round looking at the state primaries, and then looking at the local level, because there's already a lot of confusion, misunderstanding already for local government, how local government works and what the functions of local government are, and even what offices and positions exist, not to mention the recent changes in our electoral system. So now we're adding another layer of complexity with ranked choice voting. So I want to make sure that the language includes something that ties back to the initial implementation that's going to be in the state.
Trustee Perslow.
One more comment, thank you. My largest concern is that we are looking at a way of changing the system to vote when right now the state doesn't, in the existing election code, this doesn't even exist in our state. It's not, the state does not recognize this yet. This is I just don't understand how we can move forward on anything that has not been legislated, by the state.
To be a leader.
You need it to be legal, though. It's not a legal way of voting at the moment.
We have home rule authority. Just, we have the same authority that Evanston had to adopt it.
Okay, that's why they haven't implemented it yet. The state hasn't recognized it.
They're kind of a trailblazer. They're blazing the trail for everyone
Having
else.
said that, that's my opinion
That's fair.
and my concern.
I do want to, respectfully, I do want to kind of disagree with the argument that was made that we should include some language in the question about tying our question to whatever the state does. If the intent is to put this on the November ballot, I do not think it should include any language that's based on some hypothetical future action of the state. It should really be based on just the specifics of what is ranked choice voting. Do you want to approve this system? Also, for whatever it's worth, you know, the state task force is eyeing making ranked choice voting possible for the 2028 presidential primary elections. That doesn't even necessarily mean that that will actually happen. I hope that it happens. It may not. From my understanding, the political parties have a lot of say in, you know, if they even want to use ranked choice voting. So, you know, whatever the task force says, there is no guarantee that this will be implemented at any state level in 2028. What's more likely is more municipalities like Skokie and Oak Park and Naperville and other towns that are considering this. That's more likely that you see more of a growth at the local level.
Is it, are members of the board? Okay. Yes.
Good evening. David Lefsix. I am a Skokie resident. I'm just a little bit confused about and it could just be a math issue, that why are we not considering the at-large seats each in and of itself, that each one has a majority of the village behind each one, instead of lumping them together and doing 33%. It really just could be a math issue. I just don't understand that part of it. Could you clarify that?
It's the Village of Skokie, any home rule unit that proposes to consider this question has the ability to set the thresholds. So if you set the threshold at 33% or 1/3 for the successful candidate, you have fewer rounds of vote counting under that kind of a system. And you're trying to account for the whole universe of 100% of the votes. So 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 gets you to the successful candidate when you're working with at-large candidates. It almost requires a chart to walk through this. It's a little bit easier when you're doing the math. But with at-large candidates, the 51% threshold is more difficult to process when you're doing this instant runoff process. Again, if the village moves forward with this, I think it is important to explain in particular the at-large voting formula, how that works, how it will work.
Okay, this will be on the agenda
On July 15th.
next board meeting.
You know, I will just say, you know, we're just to end on a little bit of a positive note, you know, we're talking about how complicated, how confusing ranked choice voting is. I find it really encouraging to see the growth and development of ranked choice voting across Illinois, and I think we should be really proud if Skokie could be a part of that. Ranked choice voting literally kind of expands the amount of choice you have when you cast a vote. It allows you to really communicate your preference in a deeper way. It minimizes strategic voting. So if you if your conscience is saying, I really want to vote for this candidate, even though I don't think they have a chance to win, you know, you're not throwing away your vote if you vote for them, because you can rank a more likely option second. It also does a lot to discourage negative campaigning. That's one of my personal favorite things about ranked choice voting, is that if you're ranking the candidates when you're running for office, you don't want to be too vitriolic or negative against your opponents, because you want their voters to pick you second, essentially. So it doesn't end negative campaigning, but it certainly discourages negative campaigning. And I think in our current political climate, that's a really positive thing.
I would caution everybody this evening, this isn't the merits and demerits, it's a question of whether we should put it on the ballot and
Totally.
what the question is.
I'm just a fan.
That
Sorry.
debate, I'm sure we're gonna have if the board decides to move forward. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it very
Thank
much.
you.
Take care.
The next is a possible referendum establishing term limits. That also is in your packet and is open for discussion. Michael, do you want to give an explanation?
The matter of term limits has come up periodically over a number of years. And in fact, periodically candidates in the village have talked about their own personal commitment to a term limit. And so it seemed that it would be a question to raise to this board of whether they want to put within our election process set term limits. We did a fair amount of research of looking at other municipalities that have term limits. They're varied, as many of these things are, very widely vary. And so we looked to recognize the evolving structure of our electeds, and based on that, and again, looking to other well-established communities that have had term limits, we have come forward with this suggestion recommendation.
And it is.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought,
The term limit would be, once the new system is implemented, 3 terms.
correct.
So, Trustee Pierce-Sullivan.
I want to thank you very much for drawing up this resolution. I think I've been very clear that I'm very in favor of it. I think term limits are very important, and I do like the 3 years, the 3-term limits, which would be a total of 12 years, even for districts. Now I'm getting confused. Yeah, they're 2-year terms.
Well, those 2 years don't count as far as the term limits go. With staggered voting, you've got.
Got it.
Got to,
Think that through.
include
Yeah,
that.
you have to think
And
that through.
previous years of service do not count towards it. In other words, whatever, for all of you sitting here, the past 3, ultimately 4 years would not be part of that calculation until we start moving forward. It's not
state law.
Right.
Trustee Zucker.
I just really want to say that I want to give the voters the choice on this. I have heard from so many people since we have started discussion on both ends, and I think it's important that people get the right to make their choice. So thank you for drafting this.
We, and to that point, I mean, what's the essence here? The essence is to give opportunity to refresh local leadership, but at the same time to try to garner and have available some years of experience, dare I say wisdom, that comes from ongoing service. So you gotta find that sweet spot. I don't think there's a sweet spot for every individual who chooses to run, but in theory, I think we've hit upon something that creates the process of refreshing and still allows electeds to serve for enough time that, and I think as you all have seen, it takes a good term to get a lot of this under your belt and to understand it. So to bring that information and that growth of knowledge forward over a period of 3 terms seems to, again, be what we're recommending as a logical place to land.
I fully agree with Trustees Pierce-Sullivan and Sucker. I think we should put this on the ballot. I agree that 3 terms is great, moderate, very sensible. Y'all, as much as I support us moving forward with this, I want to really strongly question the wording of this question. We just talked about the incredibly lengthy ranked choice voting question. There are dozens of examples of term limits questions that have been used throughout Cook County, and the vast majority are way shorter and simpler than what has been proposed to us. A good referendum question is really direct in what it is asking voters to weigh in on. So the thrust of this question should really be, shall Skokie enact term limits? You know, term limits should really be the focus of the question. Right now, our question is really overly wordy. It says, shall the Village of Skokie, after the November 5th, 2024 general election, adopt an ordinance amending the Skokie Village Code to enact term limits for the elected offices of village mayor, village clerk, and the 2 at-large village trustees for no more than 3 terms total for each office, beginning with the 2025 consolidated election, and for the 4 district trustees beginning with the 2027 consolidated election. Which is it's a kind of a long and convoluted way of asking, do you want a 3-term limit for village positions?
It's more than that. It's responding to the need that a resolution like this, or a referendum like this, must be self-actuating.
Right.
And we kind of stub our toe if we put something forward seeking the opinion of the community to move to term limits and fail to put enough information in it that it is then conceivably attacked after the fact. We can certainly look at the language one more time, but it's key that we come forward with a referendum that leaves no doubt as to the intention and doesn't require further action that would be questionable after the public has spoken on it. So we'll look at language, but the need to make it self-actuating is what creates this, and looking at several other successful referendum, we look to this.
I will argue that, you know, term limits is different than ranked choice voting, which is not really outlined in our state election code. Term limits is very outlined in our state election code, and so the processes that would kick in if we were to adopt term limits are already spelled out. You know, so we don't need to include in this question all of this language of adopting an ordinance, amending village code. The easiest example would be the 3 electoral reform referendums that passed in 2022. They asked, for example, you know, shall the Village of Skokie adopt nonpartisan elections? Because the process for adopting that, passing an ordinance, you know, the steps is already outlined in village code. The community passed a referendum about, do you want to approve staggered terms? It didn't necessarily break down the details of here's how the staggering process is going to happen, or here's how the districting is going to happen for a hybrid system. So from my understanding, there's probably at least a third of this question that could be taken out. Instead of saying, shall the village, after X date, adopt an ordinance amending the village code, we could just get straight to, shall the Village of Skokie enact term limits? If we specify that it's 3 elected 4-year terms, then we also don't have to include the extra language about term limits start for these positions in 2025 and these positions in 2027. We can very much craft a question that's at least a third, if not a half, shorter than this one. That is more to the point.
Why does information scare you? He's giving information on this proposed referendum. Why does it scare you?
Information does not scare me. It's more just the point of a good referendum question is that when a voter, sees their ballot and reads it, they should be very quickly be able to understand, oh, this is the consequence of voting yes or no. Even the convoluted ranked choice voting question, it starts with a very clear, do you want Skokie to adopt a ranked choice voting system for these positions by this date? And then it explains all the little details. But it starts with a very clear, do you want this change for these positions at this date?
But in the prior referendum questions, we didn't have the existence of staggered elections, and so it's easier to be clear in the language when you talk about the consolidated primary and consolidated general elections to be held February 25th, 2025 and April 1st, 2025, respectively. It's easier to communicate that when we didn't have a staggered system, but when you have a staggered system with a new election system that is staggered with different offices beginning in different years, wouldn't we want the voter to understand and what exactly the timeline is for how these different individual offices are going to take effect?
I hear you. I guess the argument is I'm making that with all of this additional implementation information, it actually makes the question a little more confusing because it actually makes it seem like it's focused on adopting an ordinance as opposed to enacting term limits.
Can I kick that question back to you, sir, and clarify for us in terms of the language itself and how it was drafted? Could it be simplified in any other way to make it self-actuating?
This was drafted.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was drafted, this was drafted internally after reviewing others. We'll look at it and see.
Okay.
But much to your point, it has to fit and be able to clearly work for the structure that we've created. That's our concern.
Okay.
We don't want to go through the process and have it attacked by somebody on an issue of clarity. That's what we're after. We're after success and knowing that what we draft and put in front of the voters answers all the questions and is therefore something that can be put in place.
Okay, thank you.
Can we, I'd like to ask the board to consider asking KTJ to weigh in on the question or even kind of redraft the question. We asked KTJ to review and draft our ranked choice voting question, and yet we've kind of utilized a different process for a term limits question. What do y'all think about asking KTJ to draft a simplified question, kind of in the same style and language of their ranked choice voting question?
Are you asking us to hire them to do this? Is that what you're proposing? I'm just trying to get a clear shot here.
Would we need to?
People don't work for nothing.
Oh, I know that.
So,
I mean, we've asked them to do other things without officially
Yeah.
having
Which
them.
you've been very clear how upset you've been about that.
I know, but
oh, but now it's your ballpark, now it's okay?
I want us to do this well. That's my point. That's all my point is. And we've hired an expert to do the ranked choice voting question, and I will say, I've looked at dozens of term limits questions throughout Illinois and Cook County. I've never seen a question quite like this. This is one of the most convoluted term limits questions I've ever seen.
I'd like to
But
see,
bear in mind, this is on the November ballot before we've even started the new system. And you have to make reference to the new system so people have an understanding what they're voting for. I mean, let's face it, conceivably, we are piling on the Skokie voters an enormous amount of change. And I have had residents ask me to explain to them, what is the new system going to be? They don't understand what the new system is. And I think you've got to, as Michael was saying, you've got to make sure that there's an explanation that fits it into a system. But this will be on the agenda for the next board meeting. C, under unfinished business, performance review, manager, and corporation counsel. Trustee Johnson, you asked that this be on the agenda.
I did. I was hoping maybe you could introduce this item since you're the one who you've updated or kind of changed our board procedures for performance reviews. So I was hoping we could have a board discussion and maybe come to a consensus as a board.
Well, members of the village board told me that they did not want to go into executive session or closed session to do a performance review. And so the only other alternative was to do it by writing. I distributed to members of the village board what I think was a fairly comprehensive opportunity to discuss in writing and to evaluate both the manager and a corporation counsel. Several different topics regarding their performance. I've received all of the reviews, and by the next board meeting, I expect to have a report to everybody on what you all decided.
Colleagues, I will say, although I don't really like that we kind of just change these procedures without a lot of discussion, I do really like the written survey that was handed out. I do appreciate that we've all had time to review these different criteria for performance. I do want to really strongly encourage the board to still do a closed session performance review where we can discuss our collective responses. To me, this is really, I consider this one of our essential responsibilities. We attend our meetings, we participate in policymaking, but we also are in charge of these annual reviews. We wouldn't approve our annual budget, without holding our annual budget hearings. That's a part of our annual review. We hold these annual performance reviews of the village manager, of the corporation council, so we can really do our due diligence and ensure that these two real integral employees, that the board has an opportunity to discuss their performance, their conduct. We've had a survey. I really want to strongly recommend that we discuss the performance and the conduct of our village manager, of our corporation council, as has been historically the practice of our board.
Well, it's not historic. We have done that. I changed it shortly, I think 3 or 4 years after I became mayor. Previous to that, going back all the way to the 1950s, it was all done as we're doing it right now. And a lot of municipalities do it this way. It's up to the village board. It takes 4 votes to go into executive session. I was told unanimously, -1, that the board did not want to go into executive session. So I put together, thank you, the form that I sent out. I gave it a great deal of thought, tried to think about what is it that a good performance review would have. I talked to some people in the business world, and they told me that this is how boards of directors of some corporations do it. I believe even locally, some of the boards do it by written. Trustee Kuhn shared with me the Skokie Park District's performance review form. We do what the majority wants to do.
I will say, just to clarify, you said this decision was made kind of unanimous -1. I assume I'm the -1, presumably because I was never consulted about this change.
Well, I did not ask. I did not go around to people saying, "What do you think? What do you think?" Members of the board told me what they wanted. So I did not go out asking anybody.
Sure. Trustee Sucker.
Mayor?
Yes, Trustee Sucker, thank you.
I'll just say openly that I do not want to go into executive session to discuss the performance reviews because I don't think that it will focus on performance. And you have gotten up every meeting to tell us that it won't focus on performance. And I agree with Trustee Kuhn, who said that last week. So there's no reason to go into executive session.
There are, as you mentioned, I've been giving presentations about what I feel like is a strong need to reform our village's legal department, which to me means there's an abundance of reasons why we should be having a thorough discussion of the performance and the conduct of our corporation council and also our village manager. To me, I think the Attorney General's office has given us some really clear guidelines about what we should do and not do in a performance review. I don't see what would prevent us from having a thorough conversation about the performance and conduct of these employees.
I am concerned because the last time that we were in executive session regarding performance reviews, the questions were very targeted towards Corporation Council in terms of his actions outside of the village. Prior to any one of us getting elected. So it was a long line of questioning around his political activities. There wasn't really focus on his actual professional workload itself. Not to mention that I found it concerning that the names of 2 private citizens were used to further that agenda, and I didn't feel comfortable being in executive session, given the line of questioning that pursued, and we saw what happened in that executive session where, for the most part, those meeting minutes have been released. And I don't want to set us up for another situation where we're going to go in and there are politically motivated questions. I'd rather just have that discussion out in the open, in the public, and not subject ourselves to any OMA violation.
I don't understand why there would be a concern about OMA violations. And it doesn't seem like we are going to have a discussion about the written evaluations that we sent in. Yeah, I do. Let's wrap this up. I want to make a motion. I feel like it's my responsibility to give the board a chance to have a closed session, thorough discussion, performance review of our.
But Trustee Johnson, even in your response via email to the board, you gave a flat response in terms of what your evaluation is of Corporation Counsel across the board, and it went back to his allegations of political engagement, but that was no different than your evaluation from the previous years. I don't see how things have changed.
I will say, I know that members of this board have taken offense to some of the questions and some of the statements I've made concerning our legal department. I will say, we have not only a right, but an obligation to discuss the performance and the conduct of these 2 essential employees. So if I discuss something that I perceive to be misconduct, I would argue that it may be uncomfortable, but it is kind of an essential part of our duties to address it. So that has always been my intent.
But these arguments have persisted over the years. It went through the Ethics Commission. It went to every single board meeting right now as you speak up as a private citizen. Like, these have been the same allegations that you have accused the board.
I will say, we're really focusing on Corporation Counsel, and we're not talking about the fact that we're also skipping a complete performance review of our village manager, of the chief administrator of the village. I mean, this is really, and I respect John a lot. I'm very positive with John's performance, but I really, it's not just the more complicated dynamics about our board and our discussion of our Corporation Counsel's office. This is kind of a broader, our responsibility as trustees to conduct these performance reviews in a thorough way.
Maybe we should do performance reviews of the trustees also. I'd love to hear that one.
So I feel that sending out that questionnaire or guidelines or outline for how we can respond and do an evaluation of the corporate counsel and the village manager was an excellent way. I think that I would hope that would give you enough, Mayor, to look through and get a sense of how we feel that they're doing in terms of their job performance. I find it interesting that every time we talk about the reviews, you really, Trustee Johnson, keep going towards that fact about you're questioning the ethics of our corporate counsel, which really offends me for him. The second thing is that they shouldn't be involved in any political way. Again, I will say, just like you then come off of being a trustee and have an opportunity to go speak as a citizen, the corporate counsel or anybody who lives in the village has a right to be politically involved in the village off of company time. It's just allowed. It's your right as a citizen of this country. And it's unbelievable that you don't see that when you step down and walk over there, you're doing the same thing that you're accusing the corporate counsel of doing.
Ethics is just one part of a performance review. I think all of you know that I've had personal experiences kind of witnessing what I believe to be pretty blatant misconduct in our legal department. Putting those issues aside, a performance review is an opportunity for us to talk about all sorts of things. Our village manager's performance in being chief administrator, our corporation counsel's role in helping us craft ordinances and deal with open meetings violations, and all manner of legal issues. You know, ethics is just one part of that broader review that the mayor sent us. We should wrap this up. I will make a motion just so we can move on. I move that following the completion of the written reviews, that we enter a closed session performance review for our village manager and corporation council at one of our next 2 meetings, similar to how the board has done this in the past.
The motion fails for lack of a second.
All right. Yeah, I'll just end by saying, I really think we're really dropping the ball here. This feels like we're saying, you know, we're gonna pass a budget without doing a budget review. You know, we're just gonna, I really think we are dropping the ball on one of our key responsibilities as village trustee, which is to review the performance and the conduct of the 2 most integral village employees. And I'll leave it at that.
I feel like we did that by filling out the paper, the questionnaire.
Trustee Robinson.
Mayor, I was just gonna say, I didn't feel slighted in the written way. In previous reviews, I've been distracted. So this was able actually to give me an opportunity to be more focused and not distracted with the reviews separately. So I thought they were good questions. It gave me an opportunity again to give examples of, you know, feedback, critical feedback, growth opportunities. And again, I wasn't influenced by any other trustees. It was legitimately my perception, my experience with both of the positions. So I just wanted to be,
And nobody's name,
Yeah.
by the way, is on, nobody shared their name and put it on the questionnaire, so
So-
you needn't be concerned about.
I was just gonna ask, as far as the report, will it be a comprehensive synthesizing of
Yes,
the
I will
information?
give you the number of people who, each question had, I forget now, like excellent, good, fair, poor. I will tell you how many of you checked off excellent or poor for each question. Plus, I will take comments from each of you and incorporate them under each question, so that you'll have a comprehensive idea of what you all said. I flipped through them very quickly. All of you put comments under, not quite every question, but pretty close to it. And I will try to capsulize your comments as well.
There, you know, when we read this, you know, part of the
I
in-person
did,
review is
I did not ask anybody to give me their name. If anybody wanted to, they're free to give me their name. That, as it turns out, that was each person's response. You'll notice on the questionnaire, I don't have on their name. And that was purposely so you could decide if you wanted to put your name on it or not. It's up to you.
for whatever it's worth, this is one of the reasons why I really prefer the in-person reviews, because then I really get to hear and see each of you face to face and hear your kind of individual takes.
Well, everybody has it's up to everybody how you want to do it. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anybody who wishes to address the village board? Yes, sir. Is that the University of Michigan?
Yes, sir. Both my wife and I both attended University of Michigan.
Good school.
I almost fell asleep there, I'm sorry.
You mean ranked choice voting didn't?
This is the first village meeting that I've been to, and I've lived here for 33 years. But.
May we have your name?
My name, I'm sorry. My name is James Bolden, and I live at 9442 Harding Avenue, which is the Skokie and Evanston part of Skokie. Mr. Trustee Robinson has known me for a long, long time. My son and my daughter attended ETHS, and I'm here kind of in representing a number of people on my 9400 block of Harding. And my wife wrote this, so I'm gonna start off reading what she told me to do, so I don't get in trouble here. But we're reaching out to the board and regarding sanitation and property issues. Like I gave you my address and my name, and we have we're probably, I don't know, I'm gonna say we're probably the oldest African American family in this neighborhood. Being there for 33 years, and we have never had a problem like we are witnessing in the last 2 to 3 weeks. And that problem happens to be with rats. I actually contacted Cameron in the health department, environmental health department back last week, because we can't sit out in our back patio anymore at night because of the activity. And I have never seen this much activity in all the 33 years I've lived here. So we wanted to follow protocol, so I did call Cameron's office, and Lillian I had met years ago when there was less of a problem, a small problem. So I wanted to ask if she was still there. This problem seems to be originating from a nest somewhere south of us, and nobody of the residents seems to know what to do about it other than to call the village, go through the protocol, get someone to come out and check, and go from there. And we're okay with that. But we think the problem is coming from a home that's on Crawford. I mentioned this address before, if Cameron has it, 9413, and it's a very elderly couple there. They are, I don't think they can walk. I think they're both in wheelchairs. They've been there longer than we have. We just met them a year ago at a party at another neighbor's house, and found out they had been in their house for probably, I don't know, maybe 50 years or more. But they need assistance, and we think, we're pretty sure, based on all the neighbors and all the activity, that they have no idea what's going on at this residence. And I know Cameron said that they sent someone over to give them the form for permission to go on their property and to check things out, but they haven't gotten any response from these people.
Okay.
And I don't think that they will, because I don't think that they're in any condition to realize what's happening. Their next door neighbor, who we know is a younger family, and I talked to him last night, it's a Gleason family, and they said that they sometimes eat out in the backyard, but they leave their food out there. Or in their house, he says he's gone into it and it's in a hoarder type situation. I rode past there on the way here tonight, and I saw that there were 4 or 5 white garbage bags full of I don't know what sitting on their front lawn, and not in garbage cans. And the garbage was picked up today, so this was just put out there.
Okay.
By
Let me, after the
sorry.
meeting, let me get your phone number,
Okay.
and
Okay. And the only reason I came is because the problem has gotten so bad, and there's lots of children. Some new families have moved in, and a family behind us on Crawford with kids, they were out there having a party, and my wife and I just kind of informed them that they should talk to us about it, because, you know, there's a number of kids, and even the houses south of us, and we just know that this is not a safe environment for them. My kids are grown, they're old, they're gone, but you know, we still enjoy being in the backyard, and even for the 4th of July, we are now going out of town because we don't feel comfortable doing anything there at the moment.
I promise you, we'll look into it.
I appreciate that very much.
Thank you. And I'll get your phone number.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate it.
Is there anybody else who wishes to address the board? If not, happy July 4th, happy Independence Day.
If there's not any other public comments, I'll give one from the public podium.
Okay.
As I've said, I'll keep doing.
May I ask a question before he begins? Are we going to continue this cycle of cynicism? Are we going with the same thing? Let's see, part 15. So let me just give you a couple definitions of stupidity and absurdity. And that's doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. I, for one, am not buying into what you're selling. So the only thing in my world that is dumber than this would be if I sat here and listened again. Mayor, I mean no disrespect, but I'd rather watch paint dry than hear the same thing over and over. So you'll excuse me.
I think there's something really powerful in asking for really positive reforms despite some really entrenched oppositions. I'm going to keep going. Good evening, Mayor and Trustees. For the 15th meeting in a row, I am speaking about the need to reform Skokie's legal department, and I'm asking you to end the political hiring and political corruption in this department. I'm speaking out as an elected village official because I feel a responsibility to address the misconduct and the ethics violations that I have personally witnessed during my public service. Tonight, I want to talk about how depoliticizing the legal department would greatly improve this department and its function within our village government. It would be a tremendously positive thing. And there's a really great example from Skokie history that shows what's possible. Not to bring up some real old baggage, but as some of you know, Skokie's first great village manager, Bernard Marsh, he spent years working to depoliticize and reform Skokie's police department. When he became village manager in 1959, our police department was going through a really difficult period. Our police chief had just resigned due to what he called political interference because he claimed that the village board was engaging in political hiring, filling police department leadership positions with political hires. And within a year, the new police chief and a new police captain, two brothers who were also political hires, were the subjects of a huge bribery scandal. And village manager Marsh, to his credit, he really seized this moment as an opportunity to depoliticize the police department. He publicly opposed the board's political hiring practices. He appointed a nonpartisan citizens committee to screen applicants for a new police chief. He was greatly praised by Skokie residents for doing this. I wanted to include this quote from Don Mann, who was the president of the local Skokie Caucus Party at the time. He issued a statement that thanked Manager Marsh for, quote, taking action which will remove politics from our police department. And you can see where I'm going with this. Over 60 years later, Skokie now has one of the finest police departments in the entire state of Illinois. We've really put these issues behind us, and our depoliticized police department has really flourished. I'm arguing that it's really time for this board to do the same for a new generation, this time with our legal department. I want you to imagine with me what's possible. When you stop filling our legal department with political hires, when you stop sending village attorneys to bribe and threaten political opponents, when you stop using them to interfere in voter initiatives, when you stop asking them to cover up open meetings violations, when you stop encouraging them to solicit political campaign donations for you, when you stop letting them vet and select candidates for the village board, I guarantee you that our legal department will finally flourish. I know that depoliticizing the legal department would unlock the full potential of this department and really expand the policy-making potential of the village board, because nonpartisan government is good government, is better government.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Trustee Sucker.
I move we adjourn. Happy 4th of July.
Happy July